the Sung dynasty, which goes on from 960 to 1279 in the south, there is really very little trade and contact with Central Asia beyond the land of the Tanguts, the Khitans, and the Jurchens. Then we have this map from around 1300. And it's the Mongol Empire. And what strikes me is that everything you've been talking about, all the way from Byzantium to China and Vietnam, has become one empire. Mm-hmm. So is this the empire of the Silk Road?
Some people would say, and I think this is probably correct, that this was maybe the single greatest era in the history of the Silk Road, precisely because and we need to keep this in mind, for a relatively brief period of time. We're talking about a century, roughly, less. The Mongols managed to unite most of Eurasia. You say, well, Eurasia, starting with Russia and going east.
No, Western Asia to East Asia.
Yes,
right?
West Asia to East Asia, and including, of course, Korea. They failed in Japan, and they didn't get very far south in Vietnam, but that's another issue. But there are a couple of points here that I think we might stress. You talk about the Sung with reference to the southern Sung, and what we need to remember is that the Mongols, coming from those northern steppes, the first place they went was, in fact, to take over those territories. And they were taking over territories where, in fact, there was still a lot of that contact going on across Eurasia. So when we think about the Mongols creating this great, well, some people call it, and then some people dispute it, Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, they're building on and drawing on structures that were still in place.
So if we look at this map again, we can see down here to the south what we might call China proper. They're really able to move across the north and move north of the deserts, across the steppe, into Central Asia.
Yes. If you trace that history of the Mongol Empire, what do? After Chinggis Khan unified the Mongols, which, he's proclaimed, Chinggis Khan is a title he was given in 1206 when all the Mongol tribes came together. One of the first major conquests is northern China. And then what does he do? According to the tales that I believe, he was involved in trade, or traders came from Central Asia, from Muslim Central Asia, and there was a squabble that occurred because Chinggis sent his envoys back, and they killed his envoys and his merchants, and then he said, okay, I'm going to get my revenge. So he goes off and he conquers the heart of Central Asia. Other conquests follow, but these initial campaigns, they're in the north. And remember, it's not, southern China doesn't come under the Mongols until 1270. And at that time, you're already finding the dissolution of this Mongol Empire. But nonetheless, we have a wonderful source, actually from the 14th century, which is an Italian who was a merchant based in Constantinople. His name is Pegolotti. He's writing a merchant handbook telling people about the local trade in Constantinople, where the products come from, how much they're worth, and how they're weighed out, and that kind of thing. And there's this classic passage where he says, the routes to China are perfectly safe. And he tells people how to get there. And then there's a slight sort of qualification there, except when the local rulers along the way are squabbling. You see, but you see, even circa 1340, when this was written, there was still, and at that point the Mongol Empire had really begun to crumble. Right. There was still this perception that they had created the infrastructure and the relative security to enable people to travel all the way across Asia. So, of course, the embodiment of this comes out, and perhaps the one figure who was known to anybody who maybe is interested in the Silk Roads, for better or for worse, Marco Polo. Because Marco Polo left this wonderful account of what I think were real travels and real experiences across Asia, but very much rewritten and romanticized or whatever, so we can't always trust everything he says. And Marco Polo is this wonderful evidence of how finally it was possible for a European to travel all the way across Asia to China and back. He goes overland. He returns partly by the sea route. This is the evidence that the Mongols created the possibilities for cross-Asia travel. And some people, you see, these would have been the exceptions still, even in that time, traveled the whole route.
Wow. If we're lucky, we can ask Dan Waugh to come back and bring us up to that part of history with the great Mongol Empire and the routes being traveled across Central Asia and the linking of Western Asia, Central Asia, and East Asia. But for the moment, we're going to stay where we are. And thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you for having me.